This is Motorman Elwin here at the Burnaby Village Museum. I've got this situation here where I need to build a shelf. I need a shelf for my radio station here, so I'm here at the blacksmith shop, and I'm gonna try and get the blacksmith here to make a shelf for me. Hello there, Mr. Blacksmith. How are you?
Hello, Mr. Motorman. I'm very good, thank you.
Now, I've never been here before, but maybe you can talk to me something about your shop here, as I'm here to get a shelf made.
Well, we'd certainly make the brackets for you. That's absolutely no problem. You would choose what size shelf you want, and then we would get the metal and cut the metal to the right size and bend it, put a nice bracing in, maybe put some scrolls in, make it look pretty. Functional and pretty, that's always the best way to go. Mm-hmm. I get to charge more money that way too. Mm-hmm. And then we'd get a piece of wood and put it across the top. Excellent work. Now I've done other work for Motormen. You know, I've made the braces for the control panels in the 1223. Mm-hmm. Or actually, I adjusted them. So there was a bit of blacksmithing work went on in that device. Liz has them now.
Now, this bracket that you're going to make for me, I need the bracket to be about, maybe about 15 inches long, right angles. Now, if I ask you to make it, if I place the order with you today, how many days do I need to wait before I get this finished product, let's say painted in black?
Painted in black. Well, I guess it depends on how busy I am and whether, other people come in and need things made for them, various horseshoes or whatever. So let's say 3 days.
Oh, 3 days.
It's not a difficult job. Just a little bit of scroll work and a little bit of forge welding. So that's what we would do. Forge welding is where you put it right in the forge. That's the old style welding. That's what I do, the old style welding. You put it in there, get the metal hot, hit it together.
Oh, so you call this a forge. My children, they call this a fireplace or a furnace.
A big fireplace. Well, that's what the blacksmith has, is a forge. And that word forge is one of those, those English words that means a whole bunch of different things, right? So the forge is the actual place where they hold the fire. But they'll also call the whole building a forge. And it's a verb too, right? So when you're hitting the metal, you're forging the metal, right?
Speaking of, since we're talking about words here, let's talk about this word blacksmith. Talk to me about this word blacksmith. As far as I know, smith means to hit something, no?
To smite, that's right. To hit, that's right, old English word. So you have the coppersmiths, and they hit copper, and the silversmiths hit silver, and the blacksmiths, see, in ironwork, you have the blacksmiths and the whitesmiths. So you'd have two. And the blacksmiths would work the iron at the forge. So they would, when you put iron in the forge and it gets hot, it oxidizes and turns black. So if you're heating it, it's going to turn black. So that's blacksmith work, is when you're heating it up and hammering it or forging it. Whitesmith work is when you take it over to the bench and you don't heat it up. It's already been forged. So the whitesmith takes the file and files off everything and smooths it down and might grind it. And so whitesmith work is when you take the rough forged black metal and you polish it up again and you make it smooth and shiny and beautiful and nice. That's whitesmithing. So really they're the two, but you don't hear about whitesmithing anymore. Now it's just blacksmithing, because now blacksmiths don't make fine housewares. They used to make, things like pipe tongs and things. So they would make stuff that would be used inside the house that were nice and fancy and shiny, so they'd have to polish them up, make them nice. But then, the factories came along, they started making these things. So the blacksmiths more started to specialize in just shoeing horses and making rough work, hardware and stuff like that. So the whitesmith part of it sort of fell away. So by the 1880s, they were mostly horseshoers. But more than horseshoers, they were sort of the the mechanic of the horse and buggy age. So the factories, they could mass produce the hardware, they could mass produce the chains and the tools. So the blacksmith wasn't really making anything anymore, but he was he was a maintenance man. He turned into a maintenance man. So what he was doing, that's why you have the stereotype. That's right. You have that stereotype of the blacksmith, always shoeing horses. Because by the 1880s, that's pretty much the one place the factory could compete with them, was in shoeing the horses. But they did more than that. In a horse and buggy, you've got three things that basically go wrong in a horse and buggy. We've got
What's that?
Well, the shoes wear out on the horse's feet.
And do they always wear out evenly? Like when you put on horseshoes, is it always 4 at a time, or can you just change them, say, 1 at a time?
Well, it's often 4 at a time, but not always. You change them if they're worn out. And now there's also the iron tire. So people forget. They weren't just changing horseshoes. The wheels would be held together by an iron tire, and they would shake apart. So the blacksmith was always having to take the iron tire and cut it and make it a little smaller and weld it back together. And then he'd heat it up and put it over the wood and cool it down and shrink it back onto the wood of the wheel and squeeze the wheel back into place. So he was always fixing the wheels because they were always shaking apart. And the axles were always wearing through, so he would always have to weld the axles on. So he was always doing that sort of work, and he was making the springs for the buggy seats and things like that. So he was a general maintenance guy. So when the carriages, they started mass producing carriages around 1900, 1890s, 1900. Carriage ownership went through the roof. Everybody and his dog had a carriage. So the number of blacksmiths went up. See, this is what people don't realize. In 1900, blacksmithing was a growing profession. Not as people who made things, but as people who fixed up all the carriages on the roads. So when the horseless carriage comes in, the car comes in, well, imagine it's 1902, and you have a car, and it's the only car in the county, and you're driving along, and you break a spring. You break one of the leaf springs or something. Who are you going to take it to? You're going to take it to the blacksmith. Because they're the people who have any experience fixing car springs and buggy springs is what they would have done, which are very similar. The first cars were basically horseless carriages. They were built like carriages, so the blacksmiths didn't have a problem. And even the motors. Now you see the blacksmiths, in their shop, they had, by 1900, they were buying gasoline engines and putting them in the back of the shop and putting a long belt on them and running machines. So they'd run 3 or 4 machines off one 2-cylinder gasoline engine. So here we've got our saw. So you see there's the belt. There's the belt going. And it's coming down and it's propelling the saw. So you would have 3 or 4 machines all run off the one motor. So the blacksmith would know about gasoline engines because that's what he was using. So he would be one of the first people in the area to have an understanding of how to fix and deal with a gasoline motor. Plus, he would know how to deal with the springs and the construction of the body. So they would bring the cars to them. And I have an old magazine, the American Blacksmith magazine from 1903. And it talks about how the blacksmiths should take up fixing cars as a profitable sideline. That's what they said. They said you should start it up because it's a good way to make a bit of extra money. So they were doing that. And of course, it turned out to be, bigger than they thought. And some blacksmith shops just turned into automotive garages. So Wagner, he was a little different, though, because he invented a bumper. So he's had his shop near Central Park. So he was starting probably in the 1890s. So lots of horses on the city streets coming into his shop. By the 1920s, the horses had disappeared, right? Now, I talked to an old gentleman who had been in Wagner's shop in 1918. And of course I asked him, well, what'd you see? And he said that he was shoeing horses from days, from daybreak to dusk. Just one horse after the other after the other. Now, this makes sense because 1918 is during World War I. So what happened was the car was actually getting popular in 1912, 13, 14. But when the war broke out, all the cars that were produced went to the war effort. So at home, people started using horse and buggy again. So it makes sense that in 1918, Wagner was shoeing horses. But within 10 years, the horse was gone from the city street in Burnaby. Once the war ended, you had all these factories built for the war. They started making cars for the people at home. So the people at home now started buying cars, and in a very short period of time, the horse disappeared off the city streets all over North America, and it was replaced by cars. So by the mid-20s, you had cars everywhere. So Wagner was faced with a very, very, quick change. And what he did, what a lot of blacksmiths did, he simply started working with cars, fixing car springs. His specialty was bumpers. Now you might wonder, why bumpers? Well, because cars didn't come with bumpers. If you look at that Model T that, converted into a truck that's just outside, if you look at it, you'll notice there's no bumper on it. So the manufacturers, they didn't make bumpers because as far as they were concerned, you smashed up your car and had to buy more parts from them. That was fine. So where did the bumper come from? Well, as far as I can tell, it was the car owners themselves who wanted bumpers. They wanted something on the front of their car. So they started getting people like Wagner say, hey, make me something for the front of my car. So they started making bumpers. And I have a catalog from 1925 where you could buy, it's a great catalog because you can buy an ox yoke and a wooden wagon wheel, or you could buy a chrome-plated bumper. In 1925, you could get it all, old and new. And so they had little companies that made bumpers, but that was the idea, was that you didn't get it with the factory. So Wagner was making bumpers, and then he invented a new kind of bumper with a spring in it so that it wouldn't damage your car, it would absorb the shock. And he sold the patent for that, as far as we know, and got some money and opened a taxi cab company.
Hello, Camille here at the desk of Radio BVM today, and I'm very pleased to welcome a special guest. This Burnaby boy started in radio decades ago and just recently retired from leading the Broadcast and Media Communications Department at BCIT. A very warm welcome to Mr. Brian Atkinson.
Hello, 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 and glad to be here.
Oh, fantastic. So when did you start in radio? How did you come into this?
Well, I when I was a kid, I used to, and I see Jack Cullen on the wall. I used to work with Jack. When I was a kid, I used to sing to the radio. I thought, well, I'm receiving this, and I'm 8 years old or something like that. I'm receiving this, and I'm listening to these people, and maybe if I sang back to them, they would hear me? No, it doesn't work that way. But I was living in hope that would happen. 1962, my father brought home from work an amplifier, a microphone, and what was known as an RCA 45 record player. So it was literally the size of a 45 record. And he and a couple of speakers. And he said, this is what the disc jockeys use on the radio. And I thought, I could do that, because I listened to Red Robinson and Frosty Forst and all those guys. They were my idols. And so I could do that. So I sat down in my dad's den and I played this. And my first theme song was a thing by Bill Black's combo called Raunchy. Or Bill Justice, Bill Justice, called Raunchy. And I thought, this is what the disc jockeys do. I can do that. And there were 7 or 8 records, and that's all I had. And so I played those things. But I fell in love with it. And then got my own operation in my own basement, which eventually got into the PNE Hobby Show. And as I was saying to the group that I was speaking with earlier, when I went to university at Simon Fraser, they didn't have a radio station. So with a couple of buddies from high school, we started the campus radio station, which still exists today. And after my first year, I said, I just can't wait any longer. This new place called BCIT, it had only been open for 3 years. And I said, I got to go there and learn. And I did. So in 1967, I became a student at BCIT, and a couple of months later, I was an operator at CKNW because NW was going to BCIT for all its operators. And so my first paycheck, I trained for a few weeks, and I think my first actual shift where I got paid for being in radio came in the last week of, or my first check came in the last week of December of 1967. So I can say that since 1967, not quite the summer of love, but since those days, I've been in radio, one way or another associated with it.
Yes, from many different sides of it.
Yep.
Leading the communications department.
Yeah,
there
and that was the end of my career. I started off as an operator for the evening programs at CKNW. Moved in full time on graduation, and I became production was commercial production was my love. So I did on-air work and things like that, but it was really production that called me, and I became production director at NW in 1974, and then I moved on to teaching at BCIT at night school first, and then in the late 70s they called and said, would you like to come for day school? So I became a faculty member, instructor, then program head in radio, so what Randy Taylor has been up until now. Connie is in journalism and so on. And then head of the department in 1985, and then managed a radio station in Abbotsford for 2 years. I took a 2-year leave of absence, which you can do in academics, and managed a station in Abbotsford, worked with half the staff in Abbotsford were grads. So we had a staff of about 30. So
some
about
familiar
50 of them
faces,
were
yes.
Yeah, many. Great time working with them. And we took a struggling operation that was number 6 in the local market. And a year later, we were number 1. Great teamwork, great effort. And we turned it around and started making a lot of money and all of that good stuff. And then I came back to BCIT as the head of the department. The Associate Dean was the official title, and did that for years until 2010 when I retired.
Wow. So since 1967 officially, gosh, you must have seen a lot over the years.
Oh, yeah.
In radio.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
how have things changed from what you've seen?
Many things have changed, and nothing has changed at all. And when I say that, because I'm asked this question a lot, when I say that, people say, what the hell are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. The way we do radio is different. The microphone that you're using is a microphone that I was trained on in 1967. And it was going out, so you have it here as a period microphone. It was going out of use, things were changing in 1967. This microphone looks to be very, very current. It's an Audio-Technica, a very well-known brand. And so this kind of microphone is very current. So the technology has changed, but both of them pick up our voices and we can record them. In my day, when I started, we were recording on reel-to-reel tape, sometimes on cassette tapes. We moved there to cartridge tapes. And so the whole tape-based economy or radio way of doing things was huge. These days it's all done, as you know, on a computer. So everything that you learned on at BCIT is completely different from what I learned on as a student. But what do we do with that equipment? We communicate. We communicate one-on-one. You and I are holding a conversation, and the people who are going to hear this are going to hear it. They might be 2 or 3 people, but they'll likely be alone, standing there listening to it. So it's a one-on-one communication. And if I play music and I say, here's the latest hit by Lady Gaga or something like that, I'm playing it for you. Now, I'm playing it for 50,000 people, but I'm playing it for you, because you're alone in your car. And so that one-on-one communication, the information that I give you, because did you know what just happened this morning? There was a huge whatever someplace, and I got to tell you about that. There's a sale this afternoon, and only this afternoon at a certain store, and you can go there. All that stuff is one-on-one communication. So we're using different technology, but, and there's different approaches, and certainly the music is different and so on. But what we're doing is communicating one-on-one, and that has not changed, and it will not change in radio.
So the more things change, the more they stay the same.
The
really.
touche la chance, whatever the français is. Yeah, you're
yes,
right.
the essence of it really is.
That's right.
is
One-on-one
still-
communication, entertaining, informing. These are bywords in broadcasting. And they have been since broadcasting got going here in Canada in the 1920s.
Yes. And I wanted to ask you a bit about Burnaby's role in the advent of radio and your experiences. Did you meet any particular characters in and around Burnaby or
Well, there's me.
stations? There's you,
Not that I'm a
yes.
character. Well, I see Jack Cullen's picture on the wall, and I was talking to the group here just a little while ago about the fact that Jack lived in Burnaby for most of his life and also ran his radio program on a nightly remote, in effect, from first of all a store in Brentwood and then a small facility in a mall just west of the Kensington interchange, west of Dairyland there. So Jack and many people who have worked in local radio who've lived here in Burnaby and today who are still in Burnaby and who participate in some way, in the fabric of broadcasting in the Lower Mainland. So yeah, there's lots of characters and Burnaby is a good place to, like the premier. Today's premier, Christy Clark, is a Burnaby South grad, and she was on the campus radio station at Simon Fraser University, which I started. And I also started the one at BCIT, CKNW. Yeah, she was at NW. I was at NW when it was in New Westminster. It's now in downtown Vancouver. And there's all those changes and technology changes and everything have happened, but it's still doing the same thing as it always was.
And radio as a medium, how do you think that it differs from other forms of communication?
It's very personal. I don't think anybody would say the Global News Hour, which is the biggest gun in town. I don't think anybody would say they're my friends. But they would say that about a morning host. They would say that about some all-night person or whatever. Radio is very personal because it is usually one-on-one, and sometimes television is too. But it's like one person holding a conversation with you, just like we're holding now. It's just that we can't see each other, right? And so when you're on the radio, you have to imagine what that other person is like. And most people who've been on the air will imagine a number of different people. Because not everybody's the same, so they'll imagine old, young, dressed this way, dressed that way, whatever it might be, traveling in their car, sitting in their kitchen. You kind of imagine who you're talking to. But it is a very personal medium. No other medium is that way. Certainly, the internet is not personal at all. You might be flipping emails with somebody, posting to Facebook, and that's neat to do. And I'm not in any way denigrating from those things at all. Or taking away from them. What I am saying is that radio is the personal medium, and it works better than anybody else.
Agreed. Yes.
Good. As the host on BVM, you'd better agree.
Yes. Quite partial to radio.
Yeah, good.
All right. Well, this has been such an interesting chat, Brian. Is there any particular moments from your career that you're particularly proud of?
Well, I would say I emceed the convocation ceremonies for BCIT for almost a quarter century, I guess. And my proudest moments were watching my graduates, people who I'd taught, people who I had invested a lot of time and a lot of interest in, walk across that stage and get recognized. And so from a career, 40 some odd years point of view, I would say that those moments at BCIT were my proudest moments. I had a lot of fun in radio. I didn't want to leave it at all. When BCIT called and said, "We want you to come here," I had no desire to leave it because I was working with very creative people, had a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, a lot of good production, awards, all that neat stuff. It's been kind of neat when people go on tours from BCIT of CKNW and they come back and they say, "I saw some awards there that they have your name on it." And that's years and years of awards that they've collected from everybody, and some of those are mine. So those are proud moments. I guess a proud moment was when I left BCIT. The BC Association of Broadcasters gave me the coveted Friend of the Industry Award, which isn't given out very often. It's not a regular thing, and it was a complete surprise. And Friend of the Industry Award, and I had several hundred people shaking my hand. It was kind of neat, you know. So that is, you know, that's kind of recognition for a job well done, I guess, over a half century.
Yes,
but,
all you've done, the campus stations.
CKNW, and it's all been a
BCIT.
lot of fun. Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
making a difference is a lot of fun.
Absolutely, yes. Well, thanks again so much for joining us. This was
Glad I was
Brian
able to, yeah.
Antonson. Yes, thank you so much. And Camille signing off from Radio BVM.